backlist and frontlist titles to give you something else to think about in these crazy-ass times. Yeah. We're an independent publishing outfit located in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and my hair is wet, so that's why it looks like that. I was running a little late today. I had some meetings, so my apologies for starting 20 minutes later than normal, but so it goes. Today we're taking a look at Dianne Meili's Those Who Know. It's a little hard to see. There we go. Those Who Know, 20th anniversary edition. So this is a special book. Is profiles of Alberta's Aboriginal Indigenous elders. So it's interviews with people who remember what it was like back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and, very difficult and different times for a lot of Indigenous people. But unfortunately, a lot of the same prejudices are still around, and there's still difficulties in all kinds of ways. But what this book provides is a look back at the past and a look at people many of whom are no longer with us. So they were able to give their testimonial and add to the historical record. So I'm just going to read from the introduction to this book. I don't actually have the back cover copy, or maybe I do. Maybe I can find that. It's probably a way. I'm using the Kindle because I'm out of print books in my house. I've read all of the ones I have from NeWest. Here we go. Here's the back cover copy. So, the elders and those who know have devoted their lives to preserving the wisdom and spirituality of their ancestors. Despite insult and oppression, they have maintained sometimes forbidden practices for the betterment of not just their people, but for all humankind. First published in 1991, Dianne Meili's book remains an essential portrait of men and women who have lived on the trap line, in the army, in a camp on the move, in jail, in residential schools, and on the reserve, all the while counseling, praying, fasting, healing, and helping to birth for future generations. In this 20th anniversary edition of Those Who Know, Meili supplements her original text with new profiles and interviews that further the collective story of these elders as they guide us to a necessary future, one that values Mother Earth and the importance of community above all else. So yes, I do realize the kind of weirdness of a white guy reading out these pieces, but just trying to get the word out there. And if you're interested in hearing it directly from the people themselves, that's why we made this book. It's so that their words can be recorded, and just pretend it's not me reading it. That might help. I'm just going to read the introduction to the book. I won't read any of the specific stories from the elders, but you can pick up the book yourself and read it if it sounds interesting to you. So, Henry Laboucan places his black cowboy hat on the table and smooths his long gray hair. In a restaurant booth on a quiet winter afternoon in Edmonton, we transcend the mundane and slip back through the years when elders like Peter O'Chese, Eddie Belrose, and Robert Smallboy were still alive. Henry spent a lot of time with these celebrated men after they chose him to help mediate between themselves and government officials so they could bring cultural programming into jails. The elders knew that Aboriginal men were starving for spirituality in prison. They were successful in their bid to be able to enter jails and share ceremony and teachings with inmates who were trying to change their lives for the better. Henry shares the story of how Peter O'Chese would shoot him away when he tried to help the old man chop wood. I mean, here's this elder at 99 years of age still swinging an axe, Henry recalls, but he didn't want any help. He just said that cutting wood was his life. Henry opens his ever-present notebook to a clean page and draws a broken circle on it. He moves his pen a quarter of the way around it. This was my childhood, when I was 4 or 5 years old. I remember having a good time. Some of those old people at that time were so powerful they could levitate, he comments. He points to a space in the circle and tells me it represents the time he spent in residential school, and the magic died for him. In the middle of the circle, he draws a smaller circle and writes the word Wisdom Keepers inside. We have to gather the strongest of the strong elders we still have and learn from them. If we don't, everything is going to go. We won't have anything of that powerful way of life left, he states. He's right, and he has summed up why I wanted to develop this landmark edition of Those Who Know. When I first thought about the prospect, I had some hesitation. All but 2 of the elders I'd interviewed 20 years ago had passed away, and I thought it might be too sad to revisit their stories. I also believed that elders' roles in their communities had lessened and their wisdom was being ignored. With resources being exploited in this province more aggressively than ever, I knew that Aboriginal people's link to the land was becoming more fragile, and the clash of cultures was an even bigger problem than it had been two decades ago. Ultimately, I decided that there was never a more important time to hear from the elders than now. And so I began, starting out the same way I had 20 years ago, with my notepad and car, driving roads I hadn't traveled down since the early 1990s. The trip north to Fox Lake was especially enjoyable at the height of summer. The highway north of Red Earth Creek was deserted, and the ditches were aflame with fuchsia-colored fireweed. I stopped along the way to swim in Lesser Slave Lake and arrived at Fox Lake First Nation during the 6th Annual Leon Jr. Memorial Hand Game Tournament, which Rachel and Leon Nanuch host every year in honor of their departed son. More than 30 teams had signed up for the tournament, and the drumming went on until the wee hours of the morning. Exciting stuff, but I drove away from the crowd a few times that weekend to sit with Henri Nanuch, a quiet, gracious artist who is the son of the late Yves Nanuch, with whom I spoke in profiled long ago. We talked about his mother and how much things had changed in Fox Lake. A couple of months later, I headed off in the other direction to visit my Blackfoot and Tsuut'ina friends. The towering wind turbines beating against the western horizon of the looming Rocky Mountains assaulted my eyes. Harvesting the southern Alberta wind for electricity near Pincher Creek, they looked alien, but they were familiar sights too. The flat-topped rise of Chief Mountain brought tears to my eyes, as did the sight of the gnarled cottonwoods growing along the banks of the Old Man River, so sacred to the Blackfoot Nation. Later, as I called on the adult relatives of all the elders who had appeared in the first edition of the book, things got even better. All of them had read with pride their family member's story in the first edition of Those Who Know, and were eager to fill in the last 20 years. All the families were as happy to reconnect with me as I was to speak with them. That's when I realized that these elders hadn't left completely. They were living on through their descendants. The new elders I've added to the book were inspiring to sit with. I know the spirits are still with us through the healing works being performed by many of them, especially Arnold Mountain Horse. Who is an elder is a debatable question, but I think my friend Cliff Gladew's definition fits as well as any. He says an elder is someone who is in control of his or her emotions and who is a keeper of the culture. The people in this book have transcended jealousy, sadness, anger, and hate, and they live fully in the present. They are at peace with themselves and the world around them. They've forgiven those who've hurt them, and most importantly, they've forgiven themselves for anything they may not be proud of. Loving, sharing, and helping people, they work for the Creator and they care about passing their language, spirituality, customs, and traditions to young people. They are in touch with the unseen world of spirit and have an intimate relationship with their natural surroundings. Everyone has their own bliss. For me, it was sitting on Tom Cranebear's couch until 2 a.m, listening to him describe the evening he and a friend retrieved a pipe which had been left to sit by itself for a time in a mountainous place. As they walked towards it, stopping 4 times, twice a giant eagle flew over them. Paradise was also enjoying the crackling fire under a full moon while the late Albert Lightning shared stories about the May, Quay, So, Wook, the little people. William Delver, son-in-law of Chief Blue Quill, the namesake of Blue Quill's First Nation College, a former residential school named near St. Paul, which members of 7 bands reclaimed and turned into their own educational institution in 1971, saw the future of his grandchildren and great-grandchildren when he said they could live during a time when, I won't butcher this Cree, but his words mean earning a living will be easy, being Cree, brackets Aboriginal, will be hard to hold. Months before I wrote this introduction, things were happening on many fronts. The sad situation at Attawapiskat was occurring, and many in Canada seemed a step closer to understanding the Indian condition in this country. She had quotes there. Prime Minister Stephen Harper held a meeting with Aboriginal leaders to discuss their concerns about education, health, governance, and land claims, in an incredibly thought-provoking series called Eighth Fire about the relationship between Aboriginal peoples and the settler community was airing on CBC. All around Edmonton, Aboriginal language classes were springing up, and I continue to hear of new places to go for sweat lodge ceremonies and other cultural activities. I have full confidence that culture will never die. It just might change a little to blend with the times. I hope this book and the elders' knowledge in it make it a little harder for William Delver to have been right. I pray that in some small way, it will help our children hold on to this powerful way of life well into the future. Dianne Meili, February 8th, 2012, Stony Plain, Alberta. So yeah, it's a really interesting book. Again, you probably don't want a white guy telling you all about this stuff, but if you're interested, I would check it out. It's called Those Who Know, 20th Anniversary Edition. And yeah, it's available in print through allitup.ca. We're still using that for our print sales, but if you're interested in an ebook version, just type it into your e-reader like I did, and you can find it pretty easily that way. So thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you tomorrow for episode 54 of NeWest Press Video.